On behalf of the organizers, KSI, it's my pleasure to welcome all participants to this 2020 Asia Economic and Entrepreneurship Summit. We appreciate your taking time, your busy time to be here this morning, and certainly it's my privilege to welcome and thank you and thank our distinguished panel of speakers from 3 leading nations of the world. In that order, His Excellency Mr. Hiroshi Oka, the Ambassador of Japan to Malaysia, His Excellency Mr. Charles Hay, the Ambassador of Great Britain to Malaysia, and His Excellency Mr. Andrew Goledzinowski, the High Commissioner of Australia to Malaysia. I got a surprise phone call from His Excellency Mr. Goledzinowski late yesterday. He asked me what should he be talking about this morning. So I told His Excellency, please feel free to give your views on Australia's position vis-a-vis the Indo-Pacific outlook and vision, what we're discussing this morning, and even beyond that as well. And some of the speakers earlier over Zoom alluded to education playing a large part in the past, present, and future, and Australia and Great Britain being key centers of global education, where, for example, Malaysian students are in big numbers there. I think they can talk about it as well. And to kick off the session this morning as per the program, it's my pleasure to invite His Excellency Mr. Andrew Goledzinowski to give your presentation, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dato Sri. Good morning, everybody. So as you can tell, Dato Sri didn't really answer my question. So it leaves me wondering what to say. Perhaps I'll start off by saying, I hope that one of the consequences of the whole coronavirus period that we're in now is that we will not be wearing neckties for conferences like this. So that's my first contribution. New normal, much better. The second contribution might be to talk about what is the Indo-Pacific concept, because it's a question I get occasionally, and it's still a new idea, relatively new. When I was a young diplomat, and for many years after that, we talked about Asia-Pacific. That was the sort of the mantra. All our maps were sort of styled that way. Our rhetoric, we had institutions built around that concept and that terminology. But it changed. It changed, I think, well, for Australia, it changed because we realized that our doctrine, our foreign and security policy needed to better match our geographic reality. Now, I'm not sure Australia was the originator of the Indo-Pacific concept, but if we weren't, we were certainly a very, very early adopter. We realized at a certain point that we have both a Pacific coast and an Indian Ocean coast. They're both equally long. Much like Malaysia, we have an outlook in both directions, but we don't have a separate security and foreign policy for the East Coast and for the West Coast. That makes no sense. So we started to think in terms of Indo-Pacific. And that's when we look at the oceans. But when we look at the landmass to our north, it's also very hard to divide one region from the other. So for example, immediately to the north of Malaysia, we have Thailand that has a long Pacific coastline. And next door we have Myanmar, which has an Indian Ocean coastline. Does it make sense to think of them as being in 2 geostrategic regions, or are they in the same region? Certainly, previous experience suggests that these 2 areas are interconnected in ways which means we need to think about them as a single entity. And certainly the rise of India as a more confident, more outward-looking, more prosperous great power, or certainly potential great power, if not already, requires us to think in terms of a broader landscape. That's what it means for Australia, geographically. But it's not really, oh, and by the way, I should say other countries also started to adopt that concept. I mean, we saw ASEAN grappling with this, and through Indonesia's leadership, we now have, I think, a mature Indo-Pacific concept for ASEAN. I think it was Germany that only yesterday I read either has announced or is about to announce an Indo-Pacific concept as well. So it's something that I think has caught on because it makes sense. But that's the geography of it. What is it that we want it to do? Why is it important to think about Indo-Pacific? For us, it's a values-based idea, not just a geographic idea. For us, it's about a rules-based order. In the maritime space, it's about international law for us, and most particularly, the UN law of the sea. More broadly, it's about ensuring that conflicts and cooperation are managed within an agreed framework. This is the framework that was established following World War II. Before World War II, countries largely did what they wanted to do according to their power. Post-World War II, we had a new system in place where trade, international relations, conflict, territorial disputes were all mediated through a series of treaties and international organizations that were established in the immediate post-World War II period. It's resulted in the longest sustained period of relative peace and prosperity that the world has ever seen. That is now being tested, to be perfectly honest. And it's something which concerns us. So for us, the Indo-Pacific concept is not just about geography. It's about how nations behave and how we work together. And I think if there's an opportunity later on, I'll say a bit more about how I see middle power diplomacy working in that context. But that's, Datuk, you've given me enough. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, yes, thank you very much, His Excellency Andrew Goledzinowski, for alluding to some of the problems. And I think after this, we'll have a Q&A for about 15 minutes. We'll have plenty of time. It's my pleasure now to invite His Excellency Mr. Charles Hay, High Commissioner of Britain to Malaysia, to say his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Datuk. It's a great pleasure to be here. And this is a very challenging topic, I think, that we have in front of us, and a very important one, the Indo-Pacific Vision and Strategy. And I sit here as a country that's visibly not geographically in the Indo-Pacific region, however you define it, between two very important countries in the region. And Andrew was talking about accepting a geographic reality in the case of Australia, but in the UK, I think we're coming at it from a slightly different direction. As some of you may have noticed, there's one or two things happening in the UK at the moment with respect to our international alliances and partnerships as we go through the process of leaving the European Union. And slightly in the background, and perhaps not as widely noticed, is a whole process of resetting our international engagement, what we're calling an integrated review, looking at all of our foreign policy, development policy, trade policy, as part of that whole process of leaving the European Union. And some of you may have heard the phrase that sometimes is on the lips of British ministers and Prime Minister, which is Global Britain. And you may be wondering what that actually means. I think that the outcome of that integrated review will, I think, set out and make a reality of this concept. And it's a shorthand, of course, for the UK change of course from perhaps a Eurocentrism towards a global outlook. But I don't want to imply that the UK has not been present in this region in the past. We've got a very strong diplomatic network. We've got embassies in all 10 ASEAN countries, in all but one littoral states of the Indian Ocean. We've got strong trade and investment relationships in the region and a very strong development relationship. We invest about £2 billion a year in development in the Indo-Pacific region. As I hope many of you here know, the UK has now submitted a formal bid to become a dialogue partner with ASEAN as part of this tilt towards the Indo-Pacific. And it's no coincidence that the first trip my foreign secretary made after we left the European Union back at the beginning of the year was not to Europe, but to this region. And he came to Malaysia, Singapore, and Japan at that time. So just coming back to the wider region, we are already very active in the broader security space. I'm focusing here on the UK view of the Indo-Pacific rather than talking about the vision for the whole region in itself just now. So we're very active in the broader security space, upholding rules that my colleague Andrew referred to a moment ago, tackling piracy, organized crime, terrorism, enhancing cyber security. So I think the backdrop to all of this is a recognition that we do need to do more in this region in the future. That is the driver, I think, behind the integrated review, because this is the part of the world where the future opportunities and challenges are. The economies of the Indo-Pacific are going to account for 41% of global GDP by 2030, and by then, about 2/3 of the global consumer class will be in this region. So I think the overall shift of political, economic, and military power towards this region is going to be one of the major, perhaps the major global development over the coming years. And of course, as part of that, we have the rise of China, rivalry between the US and China. That's forcing nations and even businesses to reconsider their partnerships. And we heard earlier on that the character for crisis contains threat and opportunity, and I think that is exactly right. It is creating difficult policy challenges, as we in the UK saw when we initially agreed to the participation of Huawei in our 5G network, a decision that was later rescinded, that this was not viable. And this new paradigm also raises serious human rights concerns, for example, in Hong Kong. Now, I would love now to be able to sit in front of you and set out the new UK vision and strategy for the Indo-Pacific. But I think that would be very unpopular with my Prime Minister, who I think intends to do that himself a bit later in the year. But I think I can safely set out some clear trends that are already emerging. So, firstly, trade and investment will be key, obviously. And this is where our departure from the EU creates the greatest opportunities. So we're already negotiating FTAs with Japan, with Australia, with New Zealand and the US. We want an enhanced trade policy dialogue with India, and we're actively seeking involvement in the CPTPP. And as we go through all of this, we are actively trying to create alliances to champion free and fair trade, and to maintain and reform the rules-based trading system, part of that wider system that Andrew referred to earlier on. I think we've got great strengths. The UK has huge strengths in education. I think that's going to be a very important factor in this region. Science and technology, science and innovation. And if we look at who the UK already partners with in the area of science, about half of our global priority partners are in this region already, and that is a trend that's only going to continue. I also want to just mention climate change, because tackling climate change is, of course, an ever more urgent requirement, and the UK has a special role here as the chairman of the next Conference of the Parties in November next year. And this region contains countries with the greatest potential impact on climate change and unique vulnerabilities. I've already mentioned the security and defense space, and again, one of our aims is to uphold that rules-based international order that Andrew referred to. I won't say anything more about that now, but we can come back to that in a minute. So I think that's probably not necessarily all I should say at this moment, but we might come back to explore some of these areas. And if anybody wants to ask me about where we are in Brexit, I'd be very happy to talk about that too.
Yeah, where we are now. Thank you. The floor is yours now, Ambassador Oka, from the Japan's perspective.
Well, thank you, that's Seri, for your kind introductions on the. Actually, this is my first appearance in this kind of the public forum. So thank you, the KSI, for having me in the prestigious forum. Well, as Andrew and the Charles talked about, there are certain variations when it comes to the free and open or concept or the views or visions or strategies. So first, let me, as far as Japan is concerned, from where we come here in terms of the free and open Indo-Pacific visions, the first time we talked about something like the free and open Indian Pacific Oceans was as far back as the 2007, when the Prime Minister Abe, while he was visiting India, talked about the confluence of the two seas. Actually, that was the theme based on the Indian philosopher. But the modern relevance is that combining the two areas, the Pacific Oceans and the Indian Oceans, and looking at the interconnected area as a whole to see for the future of the prosperity, not only for the regions, but for the international community as a whole. And also at the same time to emphasize on the need to maintain the rule-based free and open maritime regime. And the next time we talked about this free and open Indo-Pacific, vision was the 2016, when we, in Kenya, again, the person was Prime Minister Abe, when he was attending what we call the TCAT, that is the Tokyo International Conference about the Japan and African countries. Every 3 and 5 years, we host the international conference for how we contribute each other for the development of Africa. And where in Kenya, he talked about the free and open Indo-Pacific visions, the importance of looking at both very much rapidly growing the Asian regions as well as the vibrant Africa, looking at these two continents as a whole. And again, the importance of maintaining rule-based free and open maritime regime to make sure that the development of these two continents will not be hampered. So this is a kind of the pathway through which we have come to the current visions in the Pacific. So although we depend for instance, the Strait of Malacca for the 80% of the oil coming from Middle East to Japan, but our kind of talking about this strategy is not only for the sake of Japan, but similarly, not only the receiving end of this strategy, but for instance, the sending end of these, the areas, for instance, the Middle East, again, the safety and security of the sea line is very important. So we are proposing this, the free and open Indo-Pacific strategy, not only for these limited countries, but for the entire community of international community. Now, what is the elements of this strategy is perhaps the three folds. Firstly, the basic concept that the rule-based, free and open, the international regime, particularly maritime regimes, need to be maintained for the prosperity of the entire international community. And secondly, for the prosperity of the international community, perhaps the enhancing connectivity is very important. When it comes to the connectivity, there are various connectivities. Of course, the physical connectivities, the building roads, building railways, building the ports, will certainly facilitate the international trade investment. But at the same time, the institutional, connectivity, like the streamlining the customs clearances, etc., also facilitate the cross-boundary the business transactions, and also the human connectivity by increasing the people-to-people exchange. This will certainly help develop the entire regions encompassed by these Indo-Pacific strategies. And thirdly, the importance of the ASEAN for this, the Indo-Pacific free and open strategy cannot be overemphasized. As Andrew and John stated, the ASEAN sits at the center of the wider regions of the Indo and Pacific Oceans. So it is very, very crucial for the ASEAN countries to play a role for making sure that the free and open, the maritime, the regime will be ensured. In that sense, we are very much encourage and welcome the announcement last year by ASEAN of the ASEAN outlook for the Indian and Pacific. There are many similarities found in these two. What we call the Indo-Pacific, the open and free strategies, and something found in the ASEAN's outlook for the Indo-Pacific. So we're very much looking forward to working together with ASEAN countries to put in place various concrete cooperation so that either physical connectivity or institutional connectivity or human connectivity will be further enhanced. And among ASEAN, the regions, Malaysia, this stands out as being geographically at the center of the ASEAN region, but at the same time, last year in the first defense paper, Malaysia defined itself as a maritime nation with a continental legacies. So we are looking forward to work with Malaysia for making sure that the free and open maritime, the regime will be ensured. Either physical infrastructure, for instance, we have put in place various ODA projects. For instance, the interstate, the water, the transporting pipeline has been complete. Although this is not the transboundary, the ODA project, but this will enhance at least the prospect of prosperity for Malaysia. And so we are very much happy that thanks to the long-lasting the policy that started in 1982, we have enjoyed a very close human-to-human connectivity. We very much like to continue with this tradition. So from where we go, of course, we have recently seen the coronavirus. And also, in our case, the Prime Minister Abe is going to step down. But the kind of challenges and opportunities we are seeing unfolding before us because of the coronavirus are not necessarily new things. For instance, we are very much happy to see how useful, the convenient for us to use this kind of the webinar style. This will perhaps accelerate for us to introduce the digital economies, but the opportunity has been there before the coronavirus has started, and also the challenges, for instance, the cyberspace security issues or the supply chains, the vulnerability. Again, this is something which pre-existing before the coronavirus, but we recognize that the current supply chains are vulnerable in that sense. So perhaps we are here from now to looking at the future. Perhaps we will accelerate what we are supposed to do. For instance, strengthening the resilience of supply chains by diversifying the production basis, or so kind of moving away from the just-in-time systems to just-in-case systems. And again, the centrality of the role of Malaysia to be played for the future, the free and open, visions remains unchanged. So we are looking forward to working with Malaysia. Just one thing is that the vision is not to form exclusive grouping to identify either we or them, but simply to subscribe to the kind of the universally applicable principle, rule-based, free and open, the maritime regime or international systems. So we hope that with the participation of as many countries as possible, the free and open strategy will be shared and supported so that we can enjoy a very much rule-based system in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Oka. Mr. Andrew Goledzinowski, before you pick up where you left off just now, I would like to ask you maybe to shed some light or enlighten us on some quote-unquote tension between the relations between Australia and China the last 1 or 2 months. I mean, most of us in Malaysia maybe don't know the background of it. Yeah, just yeah.
Sure, thank you very much, Hiroshi. Today's a particularly apposite day to be asking that question, because the breaking news this morning, and maybe some of you would have seen it on my Twitter feed, is that the last 2 Australian journalists in China have now been evacuated. I say the word evacuated because they have been in hiding in the Australian embassy in Beijing and also the Consulate General in Shanghai for the last 5 days, until we were able to extract them. It's very sad development, actually, and Australia is not alone in that. It's unfortunately part of a trend which is affecting a lot of countries. In Australia's case, it's true, there's been some commentary about tension. From our point of view, we have worked closely with China and welcomed China's economic rise over a number of years. China remains our #1 trading partner. ASEAN, by the way, is our #2 trading partner in the world. But we have some differences of view on some things. So, for example, Australia was, I think, the first country to call for a global independent panel to review COVID-19, its origins, its management, and the future. This was not welcomed by one country in particular. But eventually, it was adopted at the World Health Assembly with over 100 co-sponsors. So that's happening. Also, there's been some tension around 5G. Australia was one of the first countries to indicate that for us, 5G is a sovereignty issue. And so we adopted a rule which was country neutral, that said that we would not allow 5G providers who we think are obliged to their national security agencies. And that has excluded Huawei, because clearly they are. Under Chinese law, they are obliged to work with their national security agencies. And we respect China's law, but we also reserve the right to make our own decisions about questions that will touch on our sovereignty. Now, interestingly, since then, as Charles has mentioned, a number of other countries have followed suit. Most recently, it was Singapore that actually said that they would not be using Huawei. Now, this was not Singapore choosing between China and the US. That's what people say. It's not true. I think that was Singapore choosing Singapore, just like Australia has chosen Australia. So there's been a few irritants like that in the relationship. We think it'll pass. In the meantime, it means that Chinese consumers won't be able to enjoy Australian wine, and that's a shame, I think, for them. Maybe the price of Australian wine will come down in Malaysia as a consequence.
So the illegal smuggling of wine.
Well, we don't support any illegal smuggling. But look, these are the sorts of things that will come and go in bilateral relationships. I'm optimistic that this will settle down. But the important thing is that we continue to maintain our principles. And in particular, the principles say that coercion, bullying, and stepping outside of the existing framework for resolving disputes should be discouraged. Now, I wanted to mention something about middle power diplomacy, because I think one of the most interesting things I've heard this year, arising from coronavirus, I guess, is a statement by Foreign Minister Hishammuddin, who said that he thinks that one of the key outcomes of this disrupted period of human history that we're going through is that middle powers will become more important. That maybe the great powers will recede in some way because they've all got their own challenges, and middle powers will become more significant. Now, for me, that's interesting in one respect in particular, because I think it implies that he is now defining Malaysia as a middle power. In the past, Malaysia has always seen itself as a small country. And that's been the rhetoric, right? I think it's been a way of becoming a small target, trying to stay out of the way of the big countries. But this is my definition. A small country is a country that has no ability to influence its environment. It is a price taker. It's a country which can navigate the environment but cannot influence it. A middle power is a country which, in combination with other middle powers, has agency and can actually change the situation. Big powers, of course, can change their situation unilaterally. Middle powers have to work with each other, particularly democracies. So an example is, at the moment, Australia is working closely with Indonesia and India on maritime matters. We're working closely on geostrategic matters in what is the emerging quad between Australia, Japan, India and the US. Arguably, the FPDA, the five-power defense arrangement, which is Malaysia and Singapore, UK, Australia and New Zealand, it's been around for a long time, but arguably that also is an iteration of minilateralism. These sorts of cooperations which countries which think in similar ways are able to achieve common goals. That is not something the superpowers do terribly well, but it's something that we do very well because we have to. We have no choice. Individually, we cannot influence our situation, but collectively we can. And I think that's also something which ASEAN is moving towards. I think even as we speak, there are now talks happening between ASEAN and Beijing on the South China Sea issue. And I think that's a reflection of the fact that what we cannot achieve individually, we can sometimes achieve collectively. I think that's enough.
Thank you very much. So we see the emerging middle power, quote unquote, whichever they are or whoever they are. Mr. Hay, with UK's disengagement from EU, what would you say or expect to be some of the positive impact spin-offs for our region, especially ASEAN, with your disengagement in EU? No? Are you refocusing to this region? You mentioned about it earlier, but maybe a little bit more that you can shed some more light on it.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, just a recap of the process we're going through. The UK left the European Union at the beginning of this year, and for this year, we are in a transition period, which ends at the end of December. And at the moment, the headline news in the UK is over the arguably the most important part of the work to take that forward, and that's the negotiation of our future relationship with the European Union, which is getting to an acute stage of negotiation. So it's important we get that right, but I think one of the, we don't need to talk about the reasons why people in the UK voted to leave the European Union, but a big part of it was to, if you like, refocus the UK away from our neighbours alone and back towards, if I can put it that way, the wider world. And as I said earlier, for very obvious statistical reasons, this is going to be the most important part of the world for us in that regard. I mean, it's the place where the economic growth of the future is going to happen. We want to develop further our trade and investment relationships with this part of the world. So I've already talked about the FTAs that we're negotiating. And in Malaysia, to come close to home, I'm very pleased that we've set up a joint ministerial trade group, and we're going to look at the ways that we can further boost trade and investment between the UK and Malaysia. And that pattern is being replicated across the region. That, if you like, is the most obvious sign of a refocusing towards the Indo-Pacific. But there's a lot of other things that are going on under the surface. So I mentioned briefly science and innovation, and the UK is, I would say this because I'm the British High Commissioner, a science innovation powerhouse. I mean, we have 60 universities in the UK which have very significant global scientific relationships. And of course, we have a very, very close scientific relationship with the European Union, but we have worked very much through EU channels, which has meant that, if you like, there's been an artificially high concentration of UK scientific cooperation with European Union countries rather than countries outside the European Union. Despite that, if you look at the joint scientific work between the UK and Malaysia, the UK is UK and Malaysia jointly, it's the most cited number of papers in academia. So that's an example of where we have actually continued to develop those relationships even while a member of the European Union. But as we leave the European Union, there will be many opportunities to expand that even further. On the security side, Andrew's already referred to the Five Powers Defence Arrangement. I think that is going to become ever more important. It's the only significant defence arrangement in this part of the world. It's one which the UK is highly attached to. The UK has commissioned 2 new aircraft carriers, which are coming into service as we speak. I would not be at all surprised if one of the early voyages of one of those aircraft carriers is not to this part of the world. The support for and defense of the rules-based international system is absolutely fundamental in all of this. As I think Andrew referred to earlier, if you don't have a rules-based system, then what you end up with is a power-based system, and that's not a system that benefits anyone, least of all that, if you like, that middle group of countries where most of us sit. So I think these are the kinds of areas that I would highlight as areas where you will see visible changes as the UK leaves the European Union. That's not to downplay that relationship with the European Union, which will continue to be extremely important, but I think we will be focusing our attention also more outwards.
Thank you. In other words, EU's loss is our gain, so it will be our gains. Thank you very much. Ambassador Oka, Prime Minister Abe's era is coming to an end very soon. How would you describe post-Abe era, especially for our region and for Japan as well? I mean, post-Abe, he was going to leave the office this month. Is he going to?
Well, he's the first we adopt the British parliamentary democracy system. So the succeeding person is going to be elected first by the LDP. Then he's going to be tested or voted in the lower house of the parliament on the 16th of this month. So we are going to see who is going to be the next prime minister in just a week time. Of course, I cannot say what is the future course of the Japanese government. But I'm pretty sure when it comes to the free and open Indo-Pacific visions, because as Andrew has stated, this is not based on any, of course, these as have been explained, firstly it was introduced by Prime Minister Abe in India, and it was formally launched by Prime Minister Abe in Kenya. So it was being closely associated with the person of Prime Minister Abe. But that strategy or vision is not based on his personal thinking, but it depends on the need for the prosperity and security of the entire region needs. So I don't expect that any kind of fundamental change is taking place when it comes to Japanese visions for the free and open the Indo-Pacific the ideas, and perhaps there's going to be a stronger need for us to further strengthen this rule-based maritime regime, and also the strengthening the supply chain. For instance, the interesting thing was there is a Japanese subsidiary producing face masks in Malaysia, and but that faced certain challenges because the materials, even the face masks procured from the many countries, including India, and because of the Indian situation now, that company is facing challenge to procure necessary materials to make face masks in Malaysia. So this is kind of the challenge. Again, this is the kind of the evidence how widespread our supply chains has become. So we have to strengthen our supply chains, and also to the person-to-person interconnectivity through the, you know, the Lucas policies, etc. I don't think there is any fundamental change taking place, not only from our side, but from the side of the Malaysian government.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'd like to open the next 5 minutes or so to Q&A from the floor. Questions, sorry. Anyone would like to, yeah, please just identify yourself and thank you.
Michael O from CEO World Academy. I'd like to ask a question of His Excellency, the High Commissioner of Britain. By leaving the EU, does it mean that Britain will now be known as Great Again, Great Britain again? Thank you very much. Thank you.
Please. Like a reporter's question, you know, journalist question, yeah.
I think somebody's already taken that slogan. I mean,
Donald Trump slogan.
Indeed. So, you know, I think the aim, if we all get this right, is that UK will continue to be a strong partner of the European Union, grow our relationships with countries outside the European Union, which would be a win-win.
Thank you. Hey, yeah, next question, please. Yeah.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you, Datuk Seri Moderator, and thank you, Excellencies, for your insights. Very interesting. My question is going to be very specific to Excellency High Commissioner of Australia. You did mention that there will be some challenges since we have a long peaceful period since World War II, and we're going to be facing new challenges in terms of peacetime. Maybe you can elaborate that a little bit more. But one more question would be the India relationship with APEC. We know that APEC economies are bound to the region that have been defined geographically, but what would be the level of interaction with India by APEC economies? Should it be just a dialogue partner at the one spectrum, and at the end of another spectrum, should they be one of the full member of APEC? Although we know that APEC is non-binding and it's a voluntary basis, and it's also confined by the geographical of Asia Pacific. So what would your view be in terms of APEC involvement with India in terms of economic cooperation? One last question, very simple one. The development of Trans-Tasman bubbles at the moment. What is the status, and what are the challenges, and which other country that Australia is looking to into developing travel bubbles? Thank you very much.
Okay, I will answer the questions in reverse order. On the Trans-Tasman travel bubble, it's been delayed a little bit. As you know, Australia has experienced a second wave in Melbourne. I haven't seen the figures today, but I think we've got the rise down to sort of middle double figures, which is good. But we're not yet ready to open up our border to any other country at this stage. New Zealand also has done extremely well, but they indicated that they would like to look at a green lane between Australia and New Zealand after their general election, which I think happens next month or the month after. So hopefully by the end of the year we will get there, but at the moment we have to wait and see. Malaysia has approached Australia about preliminary talks about a future travel bubble between our countries. Malaysia also has done extremely well, although I noticed yesterday the numbers were back up into the mid-60s as new cases. But it will happen. I'm hoping that it'll happen sooner rather than later, but I can't promise a date. Although yesterday, again, if you follow me on Twitter, you'll see that the Australian Health Minister was making quite an optimistic statement, saying that Australia believes that a vaccine may be available in Australia for free to Australians by January. And we're relying very much on Oxford University to deliver the goods. And I think we've prepaid for, I think it's quite a large number of doses. On the question of APEC and India, Australia has always been a supporter of India's joining APEC. But APEC at the moment is not taking new members, so that will have to wait. It's interesting you mention APEC, because APEC, of course, is Asia-Pacific, and that comes from this earlier era where we were seeing the world a little bit differently. But in the meantime, we are engaging, Australia is engaging with India more broadly and more deeply than we ever have in the past, in the economic sphere, but also in the strategic sphere. So while we wait for APEC to open its doors again, I think we will continue to work very closely with India. And the first question you asked was about conflict in the region. I think we've all touched on that. We're seeing a situation now where there's, I think, an historically high number of border disputes in our region. In fact, a lot of borders are now being contested, and in some cases being contested physically with armed forces. That is not good. We have systems in place to deal with conflict. I'll give you an example. Not long ago, Australia had only one border dispute. That was with East Timor, Timor-Leste. As a consequence of Timor-Leste's independence, they indicated that there was a problem with where the border was being drawn. And a bit like Malaysia's situation, Timor-Leste is a country with significant hydrocarbons in the undersea area. So it became a matter of some importance to resolve this. Now, Australia is a country with a fairly large blue water navy. Timor-Leste has no navy. If we wanted to, we could have dealt with the problem that way. We did not. We instead submitted the dispute to a UN arbitral panel. Guess what happened? They found for Timor-Leste. We lost. We lost quite a lot, actually. We lost billions of dollars of potential gas and oil. Doesn't matter. Because we're a cricket-playing country, we submitted to the umpire's decision. And so now Australia has no border disputes. We resolved it. It can be done, but it's a matter of having the political will to do the right thing.
At the very least, Australia doesn't politicize the vaccine issue like Donald Trump. He says America will get the vaccine before they go to the polls in November. Actually, we have more time. Just look at the program. The next session is 12:15. We'll be having 5 minutes here. Welcome more questions. Because this is getting more interesting about new insights that we get today from various high commissioners and ambassador. Yeah, the lady in the background, please. Yeah.
Hello.
Please come forward. Yeah, just stand up. Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Haida, and I'm from the APEC Division, Ministry of International Trade and Industry meeting. Excellencies, thank you very much for sharing your perspectives on the topic. I am very much intrigued to actually understand more on what's happening in your countries. But in terms of the APEC happening this year for Malaysia, hosting APEC 2020, my question is to you, sir, Australia and Japan. Given the current situation that we're in, with the uncertainties due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and the impact it has on not just Malaysia, but the global economic recovery, what is actually your hope and probably aspiration for our leaders to conclude in the upcoming APEC Economic Leaders Meeting happening this December? Thank you.
Thank you. Good question. Yeah, thank you very much. Mr. Oka first, yeah. And then both high commissioners can even respond.
Well, thank you for the questions. The challenges are how to navigate the post-COVID-19 situations, unprecedented. Firstly, perhaps we have been talking about vaccines, but we have to make sure that the tackling the virus needs to be done. The medications and the vaccinations, when it comes to vaccine medications, is very important for the older people in the world have affordable access to the medication, the vaccine. So that kind of the principle will be supported by all the participating countries will be important so that we can move on to the post-actual the COVID-19 phase. And as for the economic development, of course, each and every country is putting their resources to revitalize economies. But at the end of the day, we need to continue to depend on trade and investment. And so, although we are very much now looking to address each and every country's domestic need to revitalize the economy, but at the end of the day, the continuations and the free and open trading and investment systems is very much important for all the countries to ride out of this coronavirus, the challenges. So the APEC coming out with the unanimous, very strong message to the international community that we need to continue to stick with the open and free international systems, not necessarily maritime systems, but the trading and investment systems does matter for our future. So I think this is something.
Yeah, thank you, Ambassador. Australia would like to respond to it.
I agree 100% with Hiroshi. One of the consequences of this COVID period is people are starting to look inward. There's a risk of protectionism, lack of faith in trade. Yes, people need to look at their supply chains and ensure they've got diversity and security, but not at the expense of free trade. Malaysia has always been a great champion of free trade, a great trading nation. So our hope is that under Malaysia's leadership, there will be a strong statement supporting continued free and fair trade internationally, because that's the basis of our shared prosperity.
Thank you. Strong message. I hope the MITI people here will convey to the minister. Thank you, the lady. Please, yeah, the ambassador.
So I'm feeling a bit left out as somebody who's not involved in APEC, but I just wanted to come in to support the points about supply chains. I think that was one of the most acute and difficult things about the COVID crisis, actually, was a realization that we all depend enormously on these global supply chains. I mean, who would have thought that even in a country which produces ventilators, a lot of the parts of the ventilators came from somewhere else. I do have to congratulate the Malaysian government on keeping the supply chains open, particularly in the case of medical gloves, where, of course, Malaysia is the world's predominant supplier. But it has made, I think it showed up the countries that could be relied on at a time of crisis and the countries that were perhaps less reliable. And that's really important as we think to the future. I also just wanted to say a word about an organization that I maybe should have mentioned at the beginning, but didn't, and that is the Commonwealth, because this is another organization of which the UK is a part and which is highly valued. And of course, there are many extremely significant Commonwealth countries in the Indo-Pacific region, and that gives us yet another network within which to work. And I think, again, coming back to the opportunities post-Brexit, working more closely with our Commonwealth partners globally is going to be another thing that we will increasingly see.
Commonwealth, yeah, long forgotten for quite some time now. Yes, some more questions that you like to, or just your comments, even some comments, yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah, please, yeah.
My name is Chua Yonhan Chua, my company. I'm with Inter-Asia Links based in Tokyo, Japan. I'm stuck here in Malaysia because of the MCO of the virus. Anyway.
Oh my God, yeah.
I always love listening to ambassadors or all the top diplomats talking about issues because they will deliver the sharpest messages in the most beautiful languages. As a layman, I go straight to the point. Yeah, and I have a question for Ambassador Hay. Mentioning about sending 2 aircraft carriers to the region. Did you ever ask the question whether the countries in the region welcome your aircraft carriers? And please remember, back 79 years ago, you sent 2 aircraft carriers in the region, and they were gloriously sunken, the Prince of Wales and the Repulse. That's part of history. Please answer that. Thank you.
Wow, that's a provocative one. Anyway, High Commissioner would like to say a few words on that. Respond.
Yeah, so that's certainly a direct question. Thank you very much for that. I don't really want to get into the history of what may or may not have happened in this region 75 plus years ago. So I think there is an obligation on the part of countries that have the wherewithal to do so, to provide what security they can and to defend freedom of navigation for all countries, because it's important that no one country or any group of countries can prevent the free navigation through the most important international waterways, and that's what it's all about.
Thank you. The short answer. Yeah. Anybody else would like to, before we wrap up? Okay, there being no other questions, I would like to answer you like that. Yeah. Okay, we will wrap up. Yeah. On that note, we end this session, and let us give a big hand to our distinguished speakers. And thank you very much for your participation. This is the first time too for me to chair session of ambassadors of the nations. Thank you very much indeed.